sometimes those who claim the loudest to love you are the quickest to forget what matters most. That's what echoed through my mind as I sat alone in my dining room, surrounded by untouched appetizers and a three-tiered cake slowly collapsing under its own weight. Crystal champagne flutes, 7 of them, stood empty and waiting, catching the late afternoon sunlight that streamed through windows overlooking gardens that 3 generations of my family had enjoyed. Gardens they were too busy to visit today. My 70th birthday had come and gone, unmarked by anyone who shared my blood, my name, or my legacy. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I didn't cry. Not then. The time for tears had passed somewhere around hour 3 of waiting, after my 4th unanswered phone call. After checking the security cameras once more to confirm that no cars were approaching the long driveway that led to Oakwood Manor. I simply sat in my grandfather's handcrafted cherrywood chair at the head of a table meant for celebration, straightened my new silk dress that no one had complimented, and made a decision that would send shockwaves through the family. That had forgotten me. My name is Catherine Sullivan. For 7 decades, I've been daughter, sister, wife, mother, grandmother, and for the past 15 years, the reluctant matriarch of the Sullivan shipping empire that my late husband expanded from a single cargo vessel to a fleet that spans 3 continents. The media calls me Boston's quiet billionaire, though I've never cared for the title. I've spent my life making space for others to shine, supporting James as he built his business, raising our children Victoria and Thomas, to believe they could achieve anything, welcoming their spouses into our family with open arms, establishing trust funds for my 5 grandchildren that would ensure they never knew financial hardship. And how did they repay 40 years of unconditional support and generosity? With empty chairs on the day when, for once, I had asked for their presence rather than offered my assistance. Before I continue, let me ask, where are you watching from today? If this story resonates with you, please subscribe to my channel. Tomorrow's video will reveal exactly what I did with the $15 million mansion my family thought would always be their safety net. And believe me, you won't want to miss that revelation. Let me take you back to how it all began. Oakwood Manor has been in the Sullivan family for 3 generations. My husband James inherited it from his father, who received it from the family patriarch who built his fortune in maritime shipping in the 1920s. The sprawling Georgian-style mansion sits on 12 acres overlooking Massachusetts Bay. Its gardens, meticulously maintained, its 32 rooms filled with antiques and artwork collected across decades of Sullivan prosperity. James and I raised our children there, hosted countless charity events, celebrated milestones and holidays surrounded by family. After James died of a heart attack at 65, I remained in the manor alone, rattling around its vast spaces while maintaining the traditions that had defined Sullivan family life for generations. Chief among these was the annual birthday, dinner for each family member, elaborate affairs with personalized menus, thoughtful gifts, and at least 3 generations gathered around the dining table. Family sustains when all else fails, James used to say, raising his glass in toast. I believed that with my whole heart, which is why I continued hosting these celebrations even after his death, even as I noticed my children's attendance becoming more obligatory than joyful. Victoria, my eldest, lives just 20 minutes away in a home I helped her purchase when she and her husband Daniel started their family. She has 3 children, Maxwell, 19, Abigail, 17, and Emma, 12, and works as an executive at a marketing firm. Thomas, my son, married Rebecca 8 years ago. They have twin boys, James and Jonathan, 7, named after their grandfather. They live 40 minutes away in the opposite direction, in a historic home that James and I gifted them as a wedding present. Thomas manages a significant portion of the Sullivan shipping business, drawing a generous salary that I insisted upon even during leaner years. Both my children have busy lives. I understand that. Victoria's position demands travel. Thomas juggles business responsibilities with his passion for competitive sailing. My grandchildren have their activities, sports, music lessons, social commitments. I've never been one to impose or demand attention. Perhaps that was my mistake. 6 months ago, I began planning my 70th birthday celebration. Milestone birthdays had always been important in the Sullivan household. For James's 70th, before his health declined, we had chartered a yacht and sailed the Greek islands with the entire family. For Victoria's 40th, I had arranged a surprise weekend in Paris. For Thomas's 40th, I had organized a private deep-sea fishing expedition off the coast of Maine. For my 70th, I wanted something simpler but no less meaningful: dinner. At home with my children, their spouses, and my grandchildren. I sent proper invitations 3 months in advance. Nothing fancy, I wrote, just family together. Everyone RSVP'd promptly with enthusiastic responses. Victoria called personally. Wouldn't miss it for the world, Mom. Thomas sent an expensive bouquet. Looking forward to celebrating you, the heart of our family. In the week leading up to my birthday, I worked with Mrs. Bennett, who has managed Oakwood's household staff for 20 years, to prepare everything perfectly. We planned a menu that incorporated everyone's favorites: Thomas's preferred Maine lobster, Victoria's beloved champagne risotto, special mac and cheese for the younger grandchildren, and my favorite lemon cake with buttercream frosting. I had the dining room decorated with fresh flowers from the garden. I spent an afternoon selecting photographs from family albums, creating a display that chronicled our journey through the decades. The day before my birthday, I received a text from Victoria. Can't wait for tomorrow. The kids are excited too. Thomas called to confirm they'd arrive by 4 p.m. Rebecca's picked out something special for you, he mentioned. On the morning of my birthday, I woke earlier than usual, feeling a girlish excitement that seemed at odds with turning 70. I treated myself to a visit from my longtime hairstylist, Marion, who styled my silver hair in elegant waves. I applied makeup carefully, chose a new dress in sea blue silk that James always said brought out my eyes, and added the pearl necklace he had given me on our 25th anniversary. By 3:30 p.m., everything was ready. Mrs. Bennett supervised the final touches on the table setting. Mr. Collins, who has tended our gardens for 30 years, had cut fresh roses for centerpieces. The cake stood ready in the kitchen, with 70 thin gold candles waiting to be lit. The champagne was chilling. Gifts for my grandchildren, I always gave them small presents on my birthday, a tradition James started, were arranged on the side table. At 4:15, when no one had arrived, I texted both Victoria and Thomas. Looking forward to seeing you all. Soon. No response. At 4:45, I called Victoria's cell phone. It went to voicemail. I called their home. Daniel's assistant answered, explaining that the family wasn't home. I called Thomas. Straight to voicemail. Rebecca's phone did the same. By 5:30, Mrs. Bennett was giving me concerned glances. Should we hold dinner, Mrs. Sullivan? She asked gently. I nodded, still believing there must be some misunderstanding, some communication error. Perhaps they were planning a surprise and running late. At 6 p.m., I tried calling my oldest grandson, Maxwell. No answer. I texted all of them. Is everything all right? Dinner is ready whenever you arrive. The messages showed as delivered but remained unanswered. At 7 eyes, Mrs. Bennett quietly suggested we consider moving the food to the warming drawers. The staff was hovering awkwardly, unsure how to navigate this unprecedented situation. In all, my years at Oakwood, I had never been stood up by my entire family. Perhaps there's been an accident, suggested Mr. Collins, who had stayed late to help with serving. The thought sent a chill through me. I called the local hospital. Nothing reported involving any Sullivan family members. At 8 with my hands, Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Slightly shaking, I did something I had never done before. I checked my grandchildren's social media accounts. Maxwell rarely posted, but Abigail was active on several platforms. What I found froze the blood in my veins. A photo posted just 45 minutes earlier showed my entire family: Victoria, Daniel, their children, Thomas, Rebecca, and their twins gathered around a restaurant table. The caption read, "Surprise birthday celebration for Uncle Thomas's new promotion. For family first." The photo showed champagne glasses raised in toast, everyone dressed in their finest, smiling broadly. In the background, I could make out the distinctive interior of the Harborview, one of Boston's most exclusive restaurants. A restaurant where reservations were typically booked months in advance, meaning this celebration had been planned well ahead of time. They had not forgotten my birthday. They had chosen to celebrate something else instead. I set down my phone and looked around the perfect, empty dining room. The cake, the flowers, the gifts, the memories displayed so carefully. All of it suddenly seemed like a stage set for a play where the other actors had decided, without telling me, to perform in a different theater. In that moment, something shifted inside me. Something fundamental and irreversible. The hurt was so profound, it transcended tears, transcended anger, and settled into a cold clarity I had never experienced before. "Mrs. Bennet," I said, my voice steadier than I expected, "please have everything cleared away. And in the morning, would you call Mr. Winters at the estate agency? I'd like him to come by tomorrow afternoon." Mrs. Bennet's eyes widened slightly. She had worked for our family long enough to understand the significance of such a request, but she simply nodded. "Of course, Mrs. Sullivan. And the food?" "Distributed among the staff to take home," I replied. "No sense in letting it go to waste." That night, I sat alone in James's study, surrounded by the maritime maps and models of ships that had charted the course of our family's prosperity. I poured myself a glass of the 30-year-old scotch he had saved for special occasions and contemplated the weight of decades spent prioritizing others' happiness above my own. James and I had met when I was 22, fresh out of college, with dreams of becoming a marine biologist. He was 30, already working in his father's shipping business, handsome and confident in a way that both intimidated and attracted me. We married within a year. I set aside my scientific ambitions to support his business goals, to establish our home, to raise our children. It wasn't a sacrifice that felt painful at the time. It was what women of my generation did. But sitting alone on my 70th birthday, I wondered what Catherine the marine biologist might have discovered, where she might have traveled, what legacy beyond family she might have created. By midnight, my phone had finally begun to light up with belated messages. The first came from Victoria. "Mom, I am so sorry. We completely mixed up the dates. Thomas got an unexpected promotion, and Daniel organized a last-minute celebration. Can we reschedule for next weekend? Love you." Thomas texted shortly after. "Just realized what day it is. Feeling terrible." The promotion celebration was a surprise from Rebecca, and I didn't connect the dates. "Call you tomorrow." Their excuses rang hollow. I had sent formal invitations. They had confirmed multiple times, including just the day before. The reservation at the Harborview would have been made weeks ago. They hadn't forgotten. They had chosen something they deemed more important. I didn't respond to either message. Instead, I opened my laptop and began researching something I had contemplated for years but never seriously pursued: marine conservation efforts in the Galapagos Islands. James and I had visited once, early in our marriage before Victoria was born. I had been mesmerized by the unique ecosystem, the breathtaking biodiversity. I had promised myself I would return someday for a longer stay. Somehow, someday, had never arrived. By morning, I had mapped out a detailed plan, not just for a visit, but for something more significant. When Mr. Winters from the estate agency arrived at 2 p.m., I was prepared with more than just the decision to sell Oakwood Manor. I had a vision for the next chapter of my life, one that had been 70 years in the making. What I didn't anticipate was how quickly my family would notice the subtle changes I began implementing, nor how dramatically they would react when they realized what I intended to do with the fortune they had always assumed would eventually be theirs. Their comfortable certainty was about to be upended in ways none of them could imagine. The morning after my forgotten birthday, before meeting with Mr. Winters, I placed 3 phone calls. The first was to Mr. Harrison, my personal attorney who had managed the Sullivan family legal affairs for 30 years. The second was to Ms. Patel, my financial advisor. The third was to Dr. Eleanor Wright, an old college friend who now directed a marine research institute in the Galapagos. My instructions to each were clear and specific. By the time my children realized the magnitude of the changes I was setting in motion, it would be too late to undo them. 3 days after they had forgotten my birthday, they would be at my door, faces pale with shock, voices urgent with alarm, suddenly finding time in their busy schedules to speak with their mother. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before I tell you about their reaction, let me explain exactly what I set in motion on that quiet morning after my 70th birthday, when I finally decided that Catherine Sullivan, not just mother, grandmother, or widow of James Sullivan, deserved to emerge from the shadows of obligation and claim her own place in the sun. If you're just joining us, be sure to watch Part 1 first, where I explained how my entire family chose to celebrate my son's promotion instead of attending my 70th birthday dinner. Today, I'll reveal the steps I took in the 72 hours that followed, actions that would transform not just the Sullivan family legacy, but my own sense of identity. Mr. Winters arrived at Oakwood Manor precisely at 2 p.m. the day after my birthday. He was a trim, efficient man in his 50s who had handled several property transactions for the Sullivan family over the years. As Mrs. Bennet showed him into James's study, a room I had suddenly begun thinking of as my study, his expression revealed mild surprise at being summoned so abruptly. "Mrs. Sullivan," he began, accepting the offered seat across from me. "This is unexpected. I hope everything is all right with the property?" I smiled, feeling a strange calm that contrasted sharply with the emotional turbulence of the previous evening. "The property is perfect, Mr. Winters. It's my relationship with it that has changed." For the next hour, we discussed what would be involved in quietly listing Oakwood Manor for sale. Not just the main house, but the entire 12-acre estate. The guest house where Thomas sometimes stayed when visiting with his family. The boathouse that had been renovated at considerable expense just 5 years earlier. "May I ask why you're considering selling?" Mr. Winters inquired, his pen poised above his notepad. "The market is strong, certainly, but Oakwood has been in the Sullivan family for 3 generations, I finished for him. "Yes, I'm well aware, but legacies end, Mr. Winters, sometimes by choice rather than circumstance." He nodded, professional enough not to press further. We discussed potential asking prices, significantly higher than I had anticipated, and the possibility of a private sale to avoid public listings that might alert my family prematurely. By the time he left, we had a tentative plan in place. Discreet inquiries to a select group of qualified buyers, professional photography scheduled for the following week, and preliminary paperwork started for what would be one of the largest residential property sales in the area in recent years. As his car disappeared down the long driveway, I turned to find Mrs. Bennet hovering uncertainly in the doorway. She had been with us since Victoria was a toddler, had helped plan James's funeral, had been privy to every Sullivan family triumph and challenge for 2 decades. "Will there be staffing changes, Mrs. Sullivan?" she asked, her voice carefully, neutral though her eyes betrayed concern. "There will be many changes, Mrs. Bennet," I replied. "But you needn't worry about your position. I'll need your help more than ever in the coming weeks, and whatever happens with Oakwood, you'll be well provided for." Relief softened her features. "Thank you, ma'am. And—" She hesitated, then continued with unusual directness. "Have you heard from Ms. Victoria or Mr. Thomas today?" "They've sent messages," I said, moving toward the window that overlooked the rose garden I had tended personally for decades. "I haven't responded yet." "I see." Her tone suggested she saw more than I had explicitly stated. "Will you be taking lunch on the terrace today? It's quite pleasant out." The suggestion was gentle, a reminder that life continued, that routines could provide comfort even when foundations were shifting. I nodded, suddenly appreciating her steady presence in ways I had perhaps taken for granted. While Mrs. Bennet arranged lunch, I made my way to the master bedroom, an enormous suite at the east end of the house, with windows that caught the morning sun and offered views of both the bay and the gardens. The room had remained largely unchanged since James's death. His reading glasses still sat on the bedside table. His favorite cashmere sweater hung in the closet beside my clothes. His collection of antique cufflinks remained displayed on the dresser. For 15 years I had preserved these small shrines to his memory, as if disturbing them might somehow erase the man who had defined so much of my existence. Now, I opened his closet and began methodically removing items. Suits to be donated, casual wear that might fit Mr. Collins's son, personal items that Thomas or Maxwell might want. By the time Mrs. Bennet called me for lunch, 3 large boxes stood packed and labeled, and I felt lighter than I had in years. My phone had remained deliberately ignored throughout this process. When I finally checked it on the terrace, between bites of Mrs. Bennet's excellent gazpacho, I found 6 missed calls and numerous text messages. Victoria had progressed from apologetic to increasingly concerned. Thomas had called 3 times, in the past hour alone. Before I could decide whether to respond, the house phone rang. Mrs. Bennet answered, then approached with the cordless handset. "It's Ms. Victoria, ma'am. She sounds quite insistent." I accepted the phone, gesturing for Mrs. Bennet to give me privacy. "Hello, Victoria." "Mom!" Relief flooded her voice. "Finally! I've been trying to reach you all morning. Are you okay?" "I'm perfectly fine," I replied, my tone pleasant but cooler than our usual exchanges. "Just catching up on some projects around the house." "About yesterday," she began, but I cut her off gently. "Yes, unfortunate timing with Thomas's promotion celebration. These things happen." A pause. Victoria had expected apologies, perhaps tears, most certainly the familiar pattern where I absorbed family oversights with understanding and forgiveness. My calm response disconcerted her more than anger would have. "We feel terrible, Mom. Truly. Thomas didn't even want the dinner. It was Daniel and Rebecca who arranged everything, and somehow your birthday completely—" As I said, these things happen. I took a sip of iced tea. "How is everyone today? The children enjoyed the restaurant, I hope?" Yes, it was nice." Victoria sounded increasingly uncertain. "Mom, we want to make it up to you. What if we all come over this Sunday? We could do a proper celebration, bring gifts, make it special." I considered the offer, imagining the flurry of last-minute shopping they would do, the hastily purchased gifts, the performance of contrition that would last exactly as long as necessary to restore the comfortable status quo. "Sunday won't work. For me, I'm afraid. I have meetings." "Meetings? On Sunday?" The surprise in her voice was genuine. In her world, I existed primarily in relation to family functions, available when needed, content in my widow's routine when not. The concept of me having meetings that couldn't be rescheduled to accommodate family plans was clearly novel. "Business matters," I said vaguely. "Perhaps next month." "Next month? Mom, we can't wait that long to celebrate your birthday. What about Saturday instead?" "I'll check my calendar and let you know," I replied, knowing I had no intention of doing so. "Victoria, I need to go." Mrs. Bennet and I are reviewing household inventories this afternoon. After we disconnected, I sat enjoying the sunlight on my face, the distant sound of waves against the shore, the scent of roses carried on the breeze. For decades, my identity had been defined by my responsiveness to others' needs, James's business associates who needed entertaining, Victoria's childhood crises that needed managing, Thomas's academic challenges that needed supporting, grandchildren's achievements that needed celebrating. For once, I was prioritizing my own needs, my own plans, and the sensation was both foreign and exhilarating. That afternoon, I met with Ms. Patel via video conference. Unlike Mr. Winters, who had seemed surprised by my sudden interest in selling, Oakwood Ms. Patel, sharp, incisive, and decades younger than me, showed no shock at my proposed financial restructuring. "The charitable foundation is straightforward enough," she explained, referring to the marine conservation initiative I wanted to establish. "We can have the paperwork ready within 2 weeks. The trust revisions will take longer, especially since you're looking at such significant changes to the existing structure." The existing structure she referenced so diplomatically was the network of trusts and financial arrangements James and I had established for our children and grandchildren. Victoria and Thomas each had trust funds that provided substantial quarterly distributions. The grandchildren had educational trusts that would convert to direct access at age 25. All were tied to the broader Sullivan family holdings, the shipping business, various real estate investments, and securities that had accumulated over generations. "How long for the trust revisions?" I asked, making notes in the leather-bound planner that had been James's last Christmas gift to me. 6 to 8 weeks, assuming all goes smoothly. "But Mrs. Sullivan—" She hesitated, then continued with professional candor. "These changes will significantly impact your family's financial expectations. Have you discussed this with them?" "I'm discussing it with you," I replied evenly. "And with Mr. Harrison tomorrow. My family will be informed once the arrangements are finalized." She nodded, accepting my decision with the same efficiency she brought to managing my investments. We spent another hour reviewing specifics, funding levels for the Galapagos Research Initiative, restructuring of the educational trusts to include public service requirements, the percentage of Sullivan shipping profits that would be redirected to sustainable maritime practices and ocean rehabilitation efforts. By the time we concluded our meeting, I had set in motion financial changes that would redirect millions from my family's future inheritances to environmental causes that had once been my personal passion. It wasn't about punishing them, though I recognized the element of consequence in my decisions. It was about finally honoring the Catherine who had existed before she became Mrs. James Sullivan, before motherhood and social obligations had reshaped her identity into something almost unrecognizable. That evening, Thomas arrived unannounced at Oakwood. I was in the library, reviewing photo albums from the early years of my marriage, selecting images to digitize and keep while preparing to part with physical memorabilia that no longer served my future vision. Mrs. Bennet appeared at the doorway, her expression conveying both apology for the interruption and uncertainty about how to handle this unexpected visit. "Mr. Thomas is here, ma'am. He's quite insistent on seeing you." I sighed, closing the album on my lap. "Show him in, please." Thomas had always resembled his father, tall, with the same strong jaw and confident bearing that projected authority, even when he felt none. As he entered the library, however, he appeared uncharacteristically hesitant, his usual assurance dampened by genuine remorse. "Mom," he began, remaining standing even after I gestured toward the chair opposite mine. "I don't know what to say except that I'm sorry. Profoundly sorry." "Please sit, Thomas. You're making my neck hurt." He complied, perching on the edge of the leather chair as if prepared to rise again at any moment. "Victoria said you wouldn't agree to a makeup celebration this weekend." "I understand if you're angry." "I'm not angry," I interrupted, setting the photo album aside. "Anger requires energy. I'm no longer willing to expend on situations I can't change. My son blinked, thrown by this philosophical response. Like his sister? He had expected a more familiar emotional landscape. Hurt feelings that could be soothed with sufficient apologies, disappointment that would fade with proper attention, perhaps tears that could be dried with heartfelt embraces and promises to do better. My calm detachment offered no clear path to reconciliation. Mom, what Rebecca and Daniel arranged, it was meant to be just a small dinner for the promotion. We never intended for it to replace your birthday. It was a terrible mistake. I studied him, this son I had raised, noting how the lines around his eyes had deepened in recent years, how silver now threaded through his dark hair at the temples. When had he started looking so much like the middle-aged man his father had been when we first met? Thomas, do you know what I wanted to be before I met your father? The non sequitur confused him. I think you studied biology in college? Marine biology, I corrected. I wanted to study the migratory patterns of sea turtles. Did you know they return to the same nesting beaches where they were born, no matter how far they travel? Some inner compass guides them home. I didn't know that, he admitted, clearly trying to understand the relevance. When I married your father, I set that dream aside. It wasn't presented as a sacrifice. It was simply expected. A Sullivan wife managed the household, supported her husband's business interests, raised children who would continue the family legacy. And I embraced that role completely. Thomas shifted uncomfortably. You are, an amazing mother. The best anyone could ask for. Thank you. But that isn't my point. My point is that somewhere along the way, I lost my own inner compass. The Catherine who once had passionate interests beyond family became buried under decades of other people's priorities and expectations. Mom, if this is about yesterday, it's about yesterday and 1,000 yesterdays before that, I said, my voice firm but not unkind. It's about turning 70 and realizing that if I don't reclaim my own identity now, I never will. Thomas's expression shifted from confusion to concern. What exactly are you saying? I'm saying that changes are coming, Thomas. Significant ones. I've made some decisions about my future, our future, that may surprise you. What kind of decisions? His businessman's instincts were suddenly alert, sensing potential disruption to the comfortable certainties that had defined Sullivan family life. We'll discuss those details once everything is arranged, I replied, rising from my chair to signal the conversation was ending. For now, please tell Rebecca and the boys that I send my love. And congratulations again on the promotion. I assume it's the regional director position you've been working toward? He stood, momentarily thrown by the shift back to ordinary pleasantries. Yes, it is. Thank you. As I walked him to the door, he paused in the grand foyer, looking up at the chandelier that had illuminated 3 generations of Sullivan gatherings. Something in my expression or manner must have triggered a deeper unease, because he turned to me with unusual solemnity. Mom, whatever you're planning, just remember that family is everything. Dad always said that. I smiled, patting his arm, gently. Your father said many wise things, Thomas. But even he didn't get everything right. After he left, I returned to the library and the waiting photo albums. The conversation had neither resolved the birthday slight nor revealed my plans, but it had accomplished something perhaps more important. I had begun the process of presenting myself to my children not as the endlessly accommodating mother they had taken for granted, but as a woman with her own history, ambitions, and capacity for independent action. By the time I went to bed that night, text messages from both Victoria and Thomas indicated they had spoken to each other about our separate conversations. Their concern was evident, though carefully couched in expressions of love and renewed apologies. Neither quite understood what was happening, but both sensed that the forgotten birthday had triggered something beyond their experience, something that wouldn't be resolved with belated gifts or makeup celebrations. They were right to be concerned. The following day, just 48 hours after sitting alone at my birthday dinner, I would meet with Mr. Harrison to implement the legal aspects of my plan, setting in motion changes that would reverberate through the Sullivan family for generations to come. By the third day after my forgotten celebration, Victoria and Thomas would understand exactly what their oversight had cost them, and they would arrive at Oakwood Manor's gates not with belated birthday wishes, but with desperate pleas to reverse decisions already far beyond their control. Welcome back to those following my journey. In part 2, I shared how I began reclaiming my identity by meeting with financial advisors and real estate agents to set my plan in motion. Today, I'll reveal what happened on that crucial third day after my forgotten birthday, when everything changed for the Sullivan family. My meeting with Mr. Harrison, the Sullivan family attorney, began precisely at 9 a.m. Unlike the other professionals I'd consulted, Jeffrey Harrison had known me for over 30 years. He had handled James's will, established the children's trusts, and managed countless legal matters for our family. His silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses gave him the appearance of a distinguished professor, rather than a corporate lawyer with one of Boston's most prestigious firms. "Catherine," he greeted me warmly as his assistant showed me into his corner office overlooking the harbor. "You're looking well." "Thank you, Jeffrey. I feel well. Better than I have in years, actually." He raised an eyebrow but didn't comment on this unusual declaration. Instead, he referenced our brief phone conversation from the previous day. "You mentioned wanting to make some adjustments to your estate planning?" "Not adjustments," I corrected, setting my leather portfolio on his desk and extracting the notes I'd prepared. "A complete restructuring." For the next 2 hours, we discussed the intricate legal mechanisms that would transform the Sullivan legacy. Jeffrey's professional composure slipped only once, when I outlined my plans for the main Sullivan family, trust that controlled the majority of the shipping company's assets. "Catherine," he said carefully, removing his glasses to polish them with a monogrammed handkerchief. "These changes will significantly impact Victoria and Thomas's financial future. The company has always been intended to pass to them, with Thomas taking operational control. The company was built by James's grandfather, expanded by his father, and transformed by my husband," I replied evenly. "None of them consulted me about succession plans. I'm simply exercising the same autonomy they did." He replaced his glasses, studying me with new consideration. "May I ask what prompted this evolution in your thinking?" I considered the question. Jeffrey had been present at dozens of family celebrations over the decades. He knew the Sullivan dynamics intimately. "Let's just say I've realized that postponing my own fulfillment indefinitely isn't the legacy I want to leave." Something in my tone discouraged further personal inquiry. He nodded and returned to the legal details with professional focus. By noon, he had a clear understanding of my intentions and had begun drafting the necessary documents. Some changes could be implemented immediately. Others would require additional paperwork and processing time. "I'll need you to come back tomorrow to sign the preliminary documents," he explained as our meeting concluded. "The remaining paperwork should be ready by next week." "Thank you, Jeffrey. I appreciate your efficiency." As he walked me to the elevator, he asked with careful casualness, "Will you be informing Victoria and Thomas of these changes personally?" "They'll be notified officially once everything is finalized," I replied, "though I expect they'll have questions before then." His slight smile acknowledged the understatement. "I imagine they will." "Good luck, Catherine." Luck, I reflected as the elevator descended, had little to do with what was unfolding. Planning, clarity, and the courage to finally prioritize my own dreams. These were the forces driving the transformation that had begun on my solitary birthday. I decided to treat myself to lunch at Oceana, a waterfront restaurant James and I had frequented throughout our marriage. The maitre d' recognized me immediately. "Mrs. Sullivan, how wonderful to see you. Your usual table is available, the one overlooking the harbor. As I settled into the familiar corner table with its spectacular view of the water, I realized how many of my regular activities had remained unchanged since James's death. I still frequented the same restaurants, sat at the same tables, often ordered the same dishes we had enjoyed together. My life had become a museum to my marriage rather than a continuing journey of my own. Today, instead of my usual salmon salad, I ordered the chef's special, a seafood paella vibrant with saffron and studded with local shellfish. The waiter seemed momentarily surprised but quickly recovered. Excellent choice, Mrs. Sullivan. And to drink? Your usual Chardonnay? I think I'll try the Albarino instead, I replied, enjoying his second flash of surprise. Small rebellions, perhaps, but symbolically significant. As I savored flavors both new and delicious, my phone alerted me to an incoming call from Victoria. I silenced it, deciding that this meal, this moment of quiet celebration for steps taken and decisions made, belonged to me alone. She called twice more during lunch. Thomas called once. I would speak with them later, but on my terms, not in response to their growing anxiety. After lunch, I directed my driver to take me to the one place in Boston that had always remained exclusively mine, the New England Aquarium. Throughout my marriage, even during the busiest periods of raising children and supporting James's business, I had maintained a private annual membership. Once a month, I would spend an afternoon wandering among the exhibits, particularly the massive central tank with its swirling schools of fish, graceful sea turtles, and undulating rays. It had been my small connection to the marine biology dreams I had set aside, a private ritual that neither James nor the children had ever fully understood. "It's just fish, Mom," Thomas had commented as a teenager when I invited him to join me. Victoria had shown more interest as a child, but had quickly outgrown what she called the boring blue building. Today, standing before the giant ocean tank, watching the hypnotic movement of countless species coexisting in their carefully maintained ecosystem, I felt a profound certainty about my decision to establish the Catherine Sullivan Marine Conservation Foundation. The initial funding, $10 million redirected from what would have been Thomas and Victoria's inheritance, would support research initiatives, habitat preservation, and educational programs focused on sustainable ocean management. My phone vibrated again in my purse. Victoria, for the fourth time. I stepped away from the tank and into a quiet corner to answer. "Hello, Victoria." "Mom, finally. Thomas and I have been trying to reach you all day. Where are you?" "At the aquarium." I moved toward a bench, settling in for what I suspected would be a lengthy conversation. "The aquarium? Why would you—" "Never mind. Mom, Thomas told me about your conversation yesterday. He's worried about you. We both are." "That's thoughtful. But unnecessary. I'm perfectly fine." "You're not acting fine," she countered, her voice tightening. "You're ignoring our calls, talking about making significant changes, being cryptic and distant. This isn't like you." "Perhaps it's exactly like me, Victoria, the me you haven't had to consider before." A pause. "What is that supposed to mean?" "It means I'm 70 years old and finally ready to live according to my own priorities rather than everyone else's expectations." Another longer pause. When Victoria spoke again, her tone had shifted from concern to something closer to alarm. "Mom, Abigail just got a strange call from her friend Madison Winters. Apparently, Madison's father mentioned at dinner last night that you're selling Oakwood Manor. That can't possibly be true." So word had begun to spread. Mr. Winters had clearly discussed the potential listing with his family, and through the efficient network of teenage social connections, the information had already circled back to mine. "It's true," I confirmed, watching a sea turtle glide past on the other side of the acrylic wall. "I've decided it's time for a change." "A change?" Victoria's voice rose sharply enough that I had to move the phone slightly away from my ear. Oakwood isn't just a house, Mom. It's our family home. Where would you even go? I haven't decided. Yet, I replied. Though this wasn't entirely true. I had already contacted a realtor in the Galapagos about long-term rental properties near Dr. Wright's research facility. Perhaps somewhere near the ocean. This is insane, Victoria said, her composure fracturing. You can't sell Oakwood on a whim because of one missed birthday dinner? Victoria, I said quietly. It wasn't a whim, and it wasn't about one dinner. Please calm down. We can discuss this when you're less upset. I'm coming over, she declared. Right now. Thomas too. Don't go anywhere. I'll be home in about an hour, I replied, ending the call before she could continue. I spent a few more minutes with the ocean tank, saying a silent farewell to this particular sanctuary, while looking forward to experiencing the real oceans that had fascinated me since childhood. Then I texted my driver to bring the car around. By the time I arrived back at Oakwood Manor, both Victoria and Thomas's vehicles were already parked in the circular driveway. Mrs. Bennet met me at the door, her expression suggesting the atmosphere inside was as stormy as I anticipated. They're waiting in the main sitting room, ma'am, she said quietly. Mr. Thomas seems quite agitated. Ms. Victoria has been crying. I thanked her and took a moment to gather myself before entering what I expected would be a difficult confrontation. When I walked into the sitting room, my children rose simultaneously from their positions on opposite ends of a sofa, where they had likely been strategizing their approach. Mom, Thomas began immediately, we need to talk about what's going on. Victoria says you've listed Oakwood for sale? I set my purse down and took a seat in the armchair that had always been mine, wingback, positioned to catch the afternoon light for reading. Hello to you both as well. Yes, Oakwood will be going on the market next week, though I'd hoped to inform you myself, rather than through the teenage grapevine. Victoria's eyes were red-rimmed, her usual perfect appearance slightly disheveled. Why would you do this? After all these years, all our family memories here, how could you just decide to sell without even discussing it with us? The same way you both decided to celebrate Thomas's promotion instead of my 70th birthday without discussing it with me, I replied, my tone matter-of-fact rather than accusatory. Thomas made a frustrated gesture. So this is about the birthday. Mom, we've apologized repeatedly. It was a terrible oversight, absolutely inexcusable. But to sell our family home in retaliation— This isn't retaliation, Thomas. It's liberation. They exchanged confused glances. For most of my adult life, I continued, I've shaped my existence around others' needs and expectations. Your father's career, your childhood's, the Sullivan family image. Even after James died, I maintained this house and all its traditions primarily for your benefit, to preserve your sense of continuity and family identity. And we've appreciated that, Victoria interjected. Oakwood is the center of our family, where the grandchildren have their Christmas mornings, where we celebrate every milestone. Except, apparently, my 70th birthday, I noted dryly. Thomas sighed heavily. Mom, please. We made a mistake, a terrible one. But this reaction seems extreme. It's not a reaction, Thomas. It's a decision. One of several I've made this week. Something in my tone must have alerted them that the house sale was merely the beginning. Victoria sank back onto the sofa, while Thomas remained standing, tension evident in every line of his body. What other decisions? He asked carefully. I've been meeting with Mr. Harrison to restructure the family trusts and revise my will, I said simply. The color drained from Victoria's face. What does that mean exactly? It means I'm redirecting a significant portion of what would have been your inheritance to establish the Catherine Sullivan Marine Conservation Foundation. The $10 million initial endowment will support research and preservation efforts in the Galapagos Islands and beyond. Thomas actually swayed slightly on his feet. $10 million? For fish? For our planet's oceans, which provide the oxygen for every breath you take. I corrected. And yes, for the marine biology career I set aside to become Mrs. James Sullivan. Victoria was shaking her head slowly, disbelief evident in her expression. This can't be happening. You can't just change everything because of one missed dinner. I'm changing everything because of one realized truth, I countered. At 70, I finally understand that I've been postponing my own dreams indefinitely while enabling both of you to take my support for granted. That's not fair, Thomas protested. We appreciate everything you've done for us. Do you? I asked. Simply. Enough to remember the one day a year I ask for your presence. Enough to prioritize my birthday over an office promotion that could have been celebrated any other evening? Neither had an immediate response to this. There's more, I continued after a moment. The quarterly distributions from your trust funds will be reduced by 60%. The difference will be redirected to environmental scholarships for underprivileged students interested in marine science, Victoria gasped. Mom, those distributions pay for our mortgages, the children's private schools. Both you and Thomas have excellent jobs with substantial salaries, I interrupted. Daniel's architectural firm is thriving, and Thomas just received a significant promotion. You might need to adjust your spending habits, but you're hardly facing poverty. Thomas had moved to the window, staring out at the gardens with his back to us. What about Sullivan Shipping? The succession plan has always been for me to take over as CEO when I'm ready. The company will continue with its current management structure for now, I replied. 20% of its annual profits will be directed to developing sustainable shipping practices and reducing maritime pollution. He turned, his expression a mixture of shock and nascent anger. You're dismantling everything Dad built. I'm honoring what your father neglected, I corrected. James was brilliant at business but short-sighted about environmental impact. The shipping industry is one of the largest contributors to ocean pollution. It's time Sullivan Shipping became part of the solution rather than the problem. Victoria was openly crying now. Why are you doing this to us? To your own grandchildren? I'm not doing anything to you, I said, softening my tone slightly. I'm finally doing something for myself, and for the oceans I've loved since I was younger than Abigail is now. The grandchildren's educational trusts remain intact, though I've added a requirement that each of them complete 200 hours of environmental service work before receiving funds. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 4 times, marking the hour in the heavy silence that had fallen over the room. Finally, Thomas spoke, his voice tight with suppressed emotion. Can any of this be reversed? If we show you how committed we are to making things right, to being more present, more appreciative, would you reconsider? I studied my son's face, his father's features etched with a desperation James had never shown. Some decisions can't be unmade, Thomas, but some relationships can be rebuilt if there's genuine desire on both sides. Victoria looked up, hope flickering across her tear-stained face. What does that mean? It means Oakwood will be sold. The foundation will be established. The trust modifications are being finalized as we speak. I paused, then continued more gently. But how we navigate our family relationships going forward, that remains open to evolution. Thomas moved to sit beside his sister on the sofa, the two of them suddenly appearing more vulnerable than I had seen them in decades. Where will you go? He asked quietly. To the Galapagos initially. I've accepted a position as patron in residence at a marine research facility there. After that, who knows? There are coral reefs in Australia I've always wanted to study, sea turtle conservation efforts in Costa Rica that need support. So you're just leaving? Everything? Everyone? Victoria's voice cracked on the final word. I'm not abandoning my family, Victoria. I'm expanding my world beyond it. I rose from my chair, signaling the conversation was drawing to a close. You're both welcome to visit me wherever I settle. The grandchildren, too. Perhaps they'll discover their own passions by seeing different parts of the world. They sat, in stunned silence, the magnitude of the changes finally sinking in. No more Oakwood Manor as the family anchor, reduced financial support. A mother transformed from reliable background presence to independent agent pursuing her own dreams across oceans. "I have dinner plans this evening," I said, moving toward the door. "We can continue this discussion tomorrow if you'd like. In the meantime, I suggest you both consider what kind of relationship you want with me going forward. Not just with the mother who sacrificed her dreams for yours, but with Catherine the marine biologist, the conservationist, the woman rediscovering herself at 70. As I left them sitting there, still processing the seismic shift in our family's landscape, I felt not the vindictive satisfaction they clearly suspected, but a profound sense of rightness, as if after decades underwater, I had finally broken through to the surface and taken a deep, life-affirming breath. The confrontation had unfolded differently than they had anticipated. They had arrived expecting to find their mother distraught over a forgotten birthday, ready to be soothed by sufficient apologies and attention. Instead, they had encountered a woman they barely recognized, one with boundaries, ambitions, and the courage to reshape her life according to her own vision rather than others' expectations. The next day would bring further revelations, including the first serious offer on Oakwood Manor and unexpected allies who supported my transformation. But the most significant changes would unfold in the months that followed, as my children began their own journeys of adaptation and discovery. Forced, by circumstance, to reconsider not just their relationship with me, but their understanding of what truly constitutes a meaningful legacy. For those following my journey from forgotten birthday to reclaimed life, welcome to the 4th chapter of my story. In Part 3, I revealed how my children reacted when they learned about my plans to sell Oakwood Manor and redirect millions from their inheritance to establish the Catherine Sullivan Marine Conservation Foundation. Today, I'll share how these decisions reshaped not just my life, but theirs as well, in ways none of us could have anticipated. The morning after my confrontation with Victoria and Thomas dawned clear and bright, a perfect New England spring day. I woke early, a lifetime habit from years of managing household staff and family schedules. But instead of immediately checking my phone for messages or problems requiring my attention, I took my coffee onto the East Terrace and simply watched the sunrise over the bay, something I had rarely made time for despite living in this magnificent location for decades. Mrs. Bennet found me there an hour later, her expression suggesting she had news to deliver but was uncertain about interrupting my reverie. "Yes, Mrs. Bennet?" Mr. Winters called. "Ma'am. He has a serious offer on the property, well above asking price. The buyers would like to tour the house this afternoon if possible." This was faster than I had anticipated. Mr. Winters had mentioned contacting a few select prospects, but I hadn't expected immediate interest. "Who are the potential buyers?" "A Mr. and Mrs. Takahashi. He's with the Japanese consulate, apparently. They're looking for a significant property to serve as both residence and venue for diplomatic functions." I considered this development. The idea of Oakwood hosting international diplomatic gatherings rather than Sullivan family Christmas mornings represented exactly the kind of transformation I was seeking. "Please tell Mr. Winters the afternoon viewing is acceptable. And Mrs. Bennet—" I paused, aware that my decisions affected her future as well. "If you're uncomfortable assisting with the sale process, I understand." She straightened her already perfect posture. "I serve the household, Mrs. Sullivan, whoever owns it. But if I may speak personally?" I nodded, curious. "I think it's about time," she said simply, then added with the hint of a smile, "And I've always wanted to see the Galapagos Islands myself." Her unexpected support lifted my spirits as I prepared for my second meeting with Mr. Harrison to sign the initial documents restructuring the Sullivan family trusts. When my driver brought the car around, I was surprised to find Maxwell, my oldest grandchild, waiting beside it. At 19, Maxwell had his father's height and his mother's thoughtful temperament. Currently in his first year at Harvard, he visited Oakwood infrequently, usually only for holiday gatherings or when accompanying his parents. Finding him here on a weekday morning was unexpected. "Maxwell," I greeted him, "shouldn't you be in class?" "Probably," he admitted with a rueful smile. "But Mom called me last night. She was pretty upset. Of course, Victoria would have contacted him immediately." Maxwell had always been her confidant, even when he was too young to fully understand adult concerns. "I imagine she had quite a bit to tell you. She said you're selling Oakwood and giving away millions to save fish." His tone was neutral, carefully non-judgmental. "That's a rather simplified version, but essentially correct. I have an appointment now, but we can discuss this when I return if you'd like." "Actually," he said, "I wondered if I could come with you. Not to the meeting itself," he added quickly, "but maybe we could talk afterward? There's something I'd like to ask you." Intrigued by this request from a grandchild who had always been polite but somewhat distant, I agreed. Maxwell rode beside me in companionable silence, absorbed in his phone as young people invariably were. As we approached downtown Boston, however, he put the device away and turned to me. "Grandma, do you remember when I was about 10 and you took me to the aquarium for my birthday?" The question surprised me. "Of course. You were fascinated by the electric eels," he smiled. "You told me they generate electricity through specialized cells called electrocytes. I thought that was the coolest thing I'd ever heard." I hadn't realized he'd retained that information. Our aquarium visits had dwindled as he entered adolescence, and I had assumed my scientific explanations had been forgotten along with other childhood enthusiasms. "I'm switching my major," he said abruptly. "From business to marine biology. I decided last semester, but I haven't told Mom and Dad yet." I stared at him, momentarily speechless. While I had always recognized an affinity for science in Maxwell, Victoria and Daniel had steered him firmly toward business, with the expectation he would eventually join Sullivan Shipping or Daniel's architectural firm. "That's a significant change," I managed finally. "What prompted it?" "Professor Whitman's Introduction to Oceanography class. It was just an elective to fulfill my science requirement. But from the first lecture, something clicked." His expression brightened with genuine enthusiasm. "Did you know there are hydrothermal vents on the ocean floor where entire ecosystems exist without sunlight? Chemical energy from Earth's core sustains them instead." "I did know that," I said softly. "In fact, I once wrote a paper on chemosynthetic bacteria in those ecosystems during my undergraduate studies." Maxwell's eyes widened. "You did? I had no idea." "There's quite a bit about me your parents never thought to mention," I replied, without bitterness, "including that I was 3 semesters into a doctoral program in marine biology when I married your grandfather." The car pulled up outside Mr. Harrison's office building. Maxwell was looking at me with new consideration, as if seeing past Grandma to the Catherine Sullivan who had existed before that identity. "We'll talk more when I'm finished," I promised, touched by this unexpected connection with my grandson. "Perhaps over lunch?" He nodded eagerly. "I'd like that." My meeting with Mr. Harrison proceeded efficiently. I signed the initial documents, establishing the Catherine Sullivan Marine Conservation Foundation and modifying the trust structures that had previously guaranteed Victoria and Thomas unfettered access to the Sullivan fortune. Additional papers would be ready the following week to complete the process. "I've received 7 calls from Thomas since yesterday afternoon," Jeffrey mentioned as I prepared to leave. "And 4 from Victoria's husband." "I'm not surprised," I replied, gathering my belongings. "They're welcome to make appointments with you directly if they have legal questions." His slight smile acknowledged the diplomatic phrasing. "And if they attempt to challenge these changes?" "They'll find them legally sound, as you've assured me. But more importantly, I hope they'll recognize that challenging my decisions would only confirm why I made them. When I rejoined Maxwell, we decided on lunch at a small seafood restaurant near the harbor. Not Oceana with its Sullivan family history, but a newer establishment popular with the university crowd. Over locally sourced oysters and clam chowder, my grandson asked the question he had been holding since our car conversation. "Why didn't you finish your doctorate? Did you regret giving it up?" I considered how to answer truthfully without diminishing his image of his grandfather. It was a different era, Maxwell. When I met James, women faced difficult choices between career and family that aren't quite as stark today. And your grandfather needed a certain kind of partner to achieve his ambitions. But that doesn't answer whether you regretted it, he persisted, showing the same incisiveness that had made James such a formidable businessman. For many years, I didn't allow myself to consider the question, I admitted. I was fulfilled by my role as wife, mother, grandmother. Or at least I believed I was. I paused, searching for the right words. It's only recently that I've recognized regret isn't quite the right emotion. It's more a sense of postponement. As if a part of me has been patiently waiting its turn for 70 years. Maxwell nodded slowly, processing this. Then he asked the question Victoria and Thomas hadn't thought to pose amid their shock and protests. What will you actually do at this research facility in the Galapagos? Will you be conducting studies? Yourself? Initially, I'll be supporting projects focused on marine conservation and sustainable fishing practices. Dr. Wright, an old college friend who directs the facility, has suggested I might guest lecture for visiting student groups. I smiled, feeling a flutter of excitement at articulating these plans aloud. And yes, I intend to participate in field research. I may be 70, but I'm quite capable of getting into a wetsuit and observing tide pool ecosystems. The mental image made Maxwell grin. I'd like to see that. Perhaps you will, I replied. The foundation will be funding internships for promising marine biology students. You might qualify once you've completed some coursework in your new major. His expression brightened, then clouded slightly. Mom and Dad are going to freak out when I tell them I'm switching majors, especially now with all the changes you're making. Perhaps, I acknowledged. But Maxwell, don't let their reaction deter you. Following one's genuine passion isn't selfish. It's the most authentic contribution you can make to the world. Is that why you're doing all this? Following your passion after all these years? Partly, I said. But it's also about creating a more honest relationship with your parents and the rest of the family. One based on mutual respect rather than financial dependency and obligation. He considered this, displaying a maturity that surpassed many adults I knew. I'd like to see the Foundation's research facility sometime, maybe during summer break? I'd welcome that, I said, genuinely touched by his interest. When we parted after lunch, Maxwell surprised me with a quick, spontaneous hug. Good luck with the Takahashis today, he said. And Grandma, I think what you're doing is pretty badass. Coming. From a 19-year-old, I considered this high praise indeed. The Takahashis arrived promptly at 3 o'clock. Distinguished couple in their 50s accompanied by their own real estate representative and Mr. Winters. Hiroshi Takahashi was recently appointed as Japanese Consul General to Boston. His wife Masako was an accomplished pianist who had performed with symphonies worldwide. Their appreciation for Oakwood was evident as they toured the property, noting architectural details and asking thoughtful questions about the home's history. In the garden, Masako paused by a stone bench overlooking my rose beds. You have created something very beautiful here, Mrs. Sullivan. Thank you, I replied. Though nature deserves most of the credit, she smiled knowingly. Perhaps. But gardens reflect their keepers' souls, I think. Yours shows great care and patience. By the end of their visit, the Takahashis had made a formal offer, substantially above asking price, with a request for a relatively quick closing as they needed to establish their diplomatic residence before a series of important trade negotiations. They would like to retain the garden design, Mr. Winters informed me after they departed. Mrs. Takahashi was particularly impressed and hopes you might be willing to share information about the plantings and seasonal maintenance. I found myself unexpectedly moved by this request. The idea that some part of my decades at Oakwood would continue, appreciated by new stewards who recognized its value. I'd be happy to provide that information, I told him, already envisioning the transition of care from my hands to Masako's. That evening, as I sat in my study, reviewing the Takahashi's offer with a sense of both finality and liberation, Mrs. Bennett announced another visitor. "Dr. Eleanor Wright is here to see you, ma'am. She says you're expecting her?" Eleanor's arrival a day earlier than planned was a welcome surprise. We had been inseparable as undergraduates, roommates with shared dreams of marine biology careers. While I had detoured into marriage and motherhood, Eleanor had persevered through a doctorate and prestigious research positions, eventually establishing the Galapagos Marine Research Institute that would soon become my new home. "Catherine," she greeted me warmly, her embrace familiar despite the decades since we'd last met in person. Time had whitened her once auburn hair and added lines around her eyes, but her energetic presence remained unchanged. "Ready to finally join me in the field?" "More than ready," I assured her, pouring wine for us both. "Though there are a few family hurricanes to weather first." Eleanor laughed. "From what you've told me, you've been weathering those for 40 years. A few more weeks won't matter." We spent the evening reviewing her proposed timeline for my transition to the Galapagos. The Takahashi's desire for a quick closing aligned perfectly with the Research Institute's upcoming projects. By midsummer, I could be settled in a comfortable residence overlooking Gardner Bay, where sea lions basked on white sand beaches and marine iguanas demonstrated the remarkable adaptations that had fascinated Darwin nearly 2 centuries earlier. "Your foundation funding will transform our conservation efforts," Eleanor told me, spreading maps and project proposals across the desk. The Sustainable Fishing Initiative alone could help preserve ecosystems while supporting local communities. As she outlined the potential impacts of the work we would undertake together, I felt a sense of rightness that transcended any lingering doubts. This wasn't merely an escape from family disappointments or a belated rebellion against decades of self-sacrifice. It was the fulfillment of purpose long deferred but never forgotten, the reunion of Catherine Sullivan with her essential self. The next morning brought expected developments. Thomas demanded an emergency family meeting. Victoria left tearful voice messages. Their spouses made separate appeals emphasizing family unity and tradition. What I hadn't anticipated was Maxwell's call informing me that he had revealed his major change to his parents, creating what he described as next-level drama on top of the existing crisis. "Dad said I was being manipulated by you," he told me, his tone suggesting he found this both amusing and absurd. "Mom's convinced it's a phase and keeps sending me listings for business internships." "And how do you feel about their reaction?" I asked. "Confirmed in my decision," he replied firmly. "If they're this controlling about my education, I can only imagine what working in the family business would be like." I smiled at his insight. Sometimes the strongest confirmation comes from unexpected sources. As I prepared for the challenging family meeting ahead, I realized that my forgotten birthday had triggered not just my own transformation, but potentially a multi-generational shift in the Sullivan family patterns. Maxwell's academic redirection was perhaps just the beginning. That evening, as Victoria and Thomas arrived with their spouses for what they clearly viewed as an intervention, I welcomed them into a home that was already transitioning from Sullivan family anchor to something new. The Takahashi's offer had been accepted. The foundation paperwork was proceeding. Eleanor Wright had returned to the Galapagos to prepare for my arrival. The changes weren't theoretical or negotiable. They were in active motion. What happened During that family meeting, the stages of grief, negotiation, and eventual acceptance my children navigated, the unexpected allies who emerged, and the profound ways our relationships evolved in the months that followed, transformed the Sullivan family legacy in ways none of us could have predicted when I sat alone on my 70th birthday. But those developments deserve their own telling. For now, let me leave you with this thought. Sometimes being forgotten by others creates the space to finally remember yourself. And sometimes, what begins as a painful rejection becomes the catalyst for the most authentic chapter of your life, even when that chapter begins at 70. The family meeting that took place the evening after Maxwell revealed his change of Major and I accepted the Takahashi's offer began exactly as I anticipated, with Victoria in tears, Thomas barely containing his anger, and their spouses offering tense diplomatic comments meant to bridge impossible gaps. We gathered in Oakwood's formal living room, the space where countless Sullivan celebrations had taken place over the decades. "This has gone far enough, Mother," Thomas began, using the formal address he reserved for moments of extreme frustration. "Selling Oakwood is one thing, though I still think it's an overreaction. But establishing this foundation without consulting any of us crosses a line." "What line would that be exactly?" I asked, genuinely curious about his perspective. "The line between making personal choices and dismantling a family legacy," he exclaimed. "Sullivan Shipping has been our heritage for 3 generations. Redirecting its profits to fish conservation undermines everything Dad built." Rebecca, Thomas's wife, placed a restraining hand on his arm. "What Thomas means," she said in her carefully modulated therapist's voice, "is that these decisions affect everyone, not just you. We're concerned about the hasty nature of these changes." "There's nothing hasty about my decisions," I replied calmly. "I've had 70 years to consider who I am beyond the roles of wife, mother, and grandmother. What appears sudden to you has been taking shape within me for decades." Victoria dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "But Mom, if you were unhappy, why didn't you say something? We could have made more appearances at family dinners, remembered my birthday," I suggested, not unkindly. "Victoria, this isn't about punishing you for specific oversights. It's about recognizing that our family dynamic has been fundamentally unbalanced for years. I've existed primarily as a support system for everyone else's ambitions." "That's not true," Daniel, Victoria's husband, objected. "You've always been the heart of this family." "The heart, perhaps," I acknowledged, "but rarely the protagonist of my own story." A silence fell over the room as they absorbed this perspective, one that perhaps had never occurred to them before. I was mom or grandma in their narratives, essential but secondary, like the setting of a play rather than its central character. "Maxwell seems quite enthusiastic about marine biology," I observed, changing tack. "Did you know he's been following Dr. Sylvia Earle's ocean conservation work since high school?" Victoria's expression shifted from hurt to confusion. "What?" "No, he never mentioned, because you and Daniel made it clear from his freshman year that business was the expected path," I said gently. "Just as my parents and James established clear expectations about my role decades ago." "That's hardly the same thing," Thomas protested. "Isn't it? Different eras, different circumstances, but the same fundamental dynamic. Those with power shaping the choices of those with less." Rebecca, always the most psychologically attuned of the group, studied me with growing comprehension. "You're not just changing your life," she said slowly. "You're trying to change the entire family system." "I'm creating the possibility for change," I corrected. "What each of you does with that possibility is beyond my control." The conversation continued for hours, cycling through predictable stages: denial, anger, bargaining, with glimpses of acceptance still distant on the horizon. By the time they departed, exhausted and unsettled, Only one concrete agreement had been reached. We would gather again in 1 month at the research facility in the Galapagos, where they could see firsthand what their redirected inheritance would support. And Maxwell is welcome to join us, I added as they were leaving. As is Abigail, if she's interested in marine conservation. Victoria frowned slightly at this invitation to her children, clearly concerned about further corruption of their priorities, but nodded stiffly. The 6 weeks that followed passed in a whirlwind of activity. Oakwood Manor's sale closed with remarkable efficiency, thanks to the Takahashi's diplomatic connections and eager desire to take possession. I kept my promise to Masako, providing detailed garden plans and introducing her to Mr. Collins, who agreed to stay on as head groundskeeper. The day I handed over the keys was less emotional than I had anticipated. Walking through the grand rooms one final time, I felt not loss but liberation, like shedding a beautiful but constricting garment that had never quite fit comfortably. Mrs. Bennet, true to her word, had decided to accompany me to the Galapagos, at least for the initial transition period, bringing comfortable continuity to my daily routines amid dramatic change. My legal and financial restructuring proceeded smoothly under Mr. Harrison and Ms. Patel's efficient guidance. The Catherine Sullivan Marine Conservation Foundation was officially established with an initial endowment of $12 million, the original $10 million supplemented by a portion of Oakwood's sale proceeds. The remainder was divided between a comfortable living trust for my personal needs and a separate educational fund for the grandchildren, still contingent on environmental service but more generously provisioned than I had initially indicated to Victoria and Thomas. Sullivan Shipping's board had been understandably concerned about the profit redirection, but when presented with detailed plans for developing industry-leading sustainable practices, complete with projections showing potential long-term benefits both environmentally and financially, they responded with unexpected enthusiasm. Thomas, to his credit, had set aside his personal grievances enough to review these proposals professionally, eventually acknowledging they represented sound business strategy in an increasingly environmentally conscious marketplace. By the time I boarded a private flight to the Galapagos, an extravagance I justified as my final significant carbon splurge before embracing a more sustainable lifestyle, tensions with my children had evolved from outright hostility to wary uncertainty. They remained hurt and confused, but the initial shock had subsided enough for questions to replace accusations in our increasingly frequent conversations. The Galapagos welcomed me with breathtaking beauty that exceeded even my decades-old memories. My new home, a modest but elegant villa overlooking Gardner Bay on Espanola Island, offered panoramic ocean views and easy access to the research facility where Eleanor had already integrated me into several key projects. Within days of arrival, I established new rhythms, mornings spent reviewing conservation proposals submitted to the Foundation, afternoons often in the field observing marine ecosystems, evenings on my terrace, watching magnificent sunsets while discussing research findings with Eleanor and her team of dedicated scientists. For the first time in decades, I was living according to my own interests and schedule, rather than in response to others' expectations. The liberation was so profound that occasionally I found myself overwhelmed by spontaneous tears of gratitude for this second chance, for the courage to claim it, and yes, even for the forgotten birthday that had catalyzed this transformation. Month after my arrival, true to our agreement, the Sullivan contingent descended on the Galapagos. Victoria and Daniel arrived with Abigail and Emma. Maxwell was already there, having arranged an independent visit 2 weeks earlier and immediately volunteering with a sea turtle monitoring project. Thomas and Rebecca brought their twins, who were ecstatic about the prospect of seeing real pirates' islands, having recently developed an obsession with maritime history. I had arranged for them to stay in guest accommodations at the research facility rather than crowding my villa, a small but significant boundary that established our new relationship dynamic from the outset. The first evening, I hosted a welcome dinner on my terrace, where Eleanor presented an overview of the Foundation's inaugural projects. The Sustainable Fishing Initiative has already engaged 3 local communities, she explained, displaying photographs of recent workshops. And the Education Outreach Program begins next month in schools across the archipelago. How exactly does this benefit the Sullivan family? Thomas asked, his tone less confrontational than genuinely curious. Eleanor smiled. Beyond the tax advantages of philanthropic giving. It positions Sullivan Shipping as an environmental leader in an industry increasingly scrutinized for its ecological impact. The research emerging from these programs will provide your company valuable data for developing green technologies that may soon become regulatory requirements anyway. Thomas nodded slowly, exchanging thoughtful glances with Rebecca. The business case was beginning to resonate with him in ways emotional appeals had not. The following days brought experiences I had carefully orchestrated to showcase not just the Foundation's work, but the extraordinary environment that had captivated my imagination since college. We observed blue-footed boobies performing their distinctive mating dances, snorkeled alongside playful sea lions, and witnessed marine iguanas demonstrating their remarkable adaptations to ocean life. The transformation in my grandchildren was immediate and profound. Emma, at 12, appointed herself official photographer, documenting everything from Galapagos tortoises to microscopic plankton samples. The twins, despite being only 7, absorbed scientific information with surprising sophistication, engaging research assistants with endless questions. Abigail, initially the most resistant to the trip, found unexpected connection with a young marine biologist studying plastic pollution, a conversation that evolved into serious discussion of possible internship opportunities. Maxwell, already integrated into the research community, served as an enthusiastic bridge between his younger cousins and the scientific work underway. Seeing him in this element, confident, engaged, intellectually stimulated, visibly impacted Victoria and Daniel's perspective on his academic choices. He's really good at explaining complex concepts, Victoria admitted one evening as we watched Maxwell demonstrating water testing procedures to the twins. I've never seen him so animated. Because he's following genuine passion rather than prescribed expectations, I suggested. There's an authenticity to purpose-driven work that can't be manufactured. She studied me thoughtfully. Like what you're doing now. This isn't just about the Foundation or environmental causes, is it? It's about finally living authentically. It was the first indication that my daughter was beginning to see beyond her own disappointment to recognize the legitimate human needs driving my choices. The visit's pivotal moment came unexpectedly during our final evening, when Thomas proposed a sunset cruise around the island. As we gathered on the small research vessel, he cleared his throat with uncharacteristic hesitation. "I'd like to propose a toast," he began, raising his glass. "To Mom, not just for her birthday, much belated as this acknowledgement is, but for showing remarkable courage in reinventing her life at 70. Surprised murmurs rippled through the family group. "Rebecca and I have been talking," he continued, "about priorities, about legacy, about what truly matters, and we've realized something important." He turned to face me directly. "You were right, Mom. The family patterns needed disruption. We had become entitled, complacent, and frankly somewhat hollow in our pursuits." Victoria nodded beside him. "I was furious when you redirected the trust funds," she admitted. "But these past months have forced Daniel and me to evaluate what we're really teaching our children about money, about purpose, about service. We're establishing a matching program," Daniel added. "For every hour the children spend on environmental service, we'll match funds toward their education, similar to what you've done, but as an active family value rather than just an inherited requirement." I felt tears gathering, unexpected emotion, closing my throat. That's wonderful." "There's more," Thomas said. Sullivan Shipping is establishing a formal partnership with your foundation, not just profit sharing, but integrating sustainable practices throughout our operations. We're calling it the Catherine Sullivan Initiative for Maritime Sustainability. We should have listened years ago when you first raised concerns about the environmental impact, Rebecca added quietly. James wasn't wrong about building the business, but you weren't wrong about preserving the oceans it depends on. As the sun set over the Galapagos waters, painting the sky in magnificent oranges and purples, I found myself surrounded not by the resentful family members who had confronted me at Oakwood months earlier, but by people genuinely engaged in their own processes of growth and discovery. The forgotten birthday had indeed triggered transformation, not just mine, but a multi-generational recalibration of values, priorities, and possibilities. In the year that followed that reconciliation cruise, our family dynamic continued evolving, in ways I could never have orchestrated through conventional means. Maxwell completed his marine biology degree with honors and joined the foundation as a junior researcher. Abigail, influenced by her Galapagos experience, incorporated environmental sustainability into her business school studies. Even Victoria and Thomas found themselves increasingly drawn to the islands, establishing seasonal residences nearby as their involvement with conservation efforts deepened. Oakwood Manor, meanwhile, flourished under the Takahashi's stewardship. Masako expanded the gardens to include Japanese elements that complemented rather than replaced my original designs. The diplomatic functions hosted there brought international attention to environmental causes, creating unexpected synergy with the foundation's work. As for me, Catherine Sullivan, marine conservationist, foundation director, and finally the protagonist of my own story, I celebrated my 71st birthday surrounded by family on a Galapagos beach. The dinner was simple compared to Oakwood's elaborate traditional celebrations, but infinitely more meaningful for being freely chosen rather than dictated by obligation. "Any regrets?" Eleanor asked quietly as we watched my grandchildren collecting shells along the shoreline, the research facility's lights twinkling on the hillside above us. About the path not taken decades ago? Perhaps, I admitted, but none at all about the path chosen now. Sometimes the journey arrives at its true destination through unexpected detours. If my forgotten 70th birthday taught me anything, it's this. It's never too late to reclaim your authentic self. The roles we play for others, mother, grandmother, supportive spouse, need not eclipse our essential identity or purpose. Sometimes the greatest gift we can offer our loved ones is the courage to pursue our own dreams, demonstrating by example that life's most meaningful chapters can begin at any age. As I approach 72, I'm more engaged, more purposeful, and paradoxically, more connected to my family than in all the decades I spent maintaining traditions at Oakwood Manor. The Foundation's work expands monthly, with research projects now spanning 3 countries and educational initiatives reaching thousands of students. Maxwell recently announced plans to pursue his doctorate, focusing on climate change impacts on marine ecosystems. A dream I once deferred that will now continue through a new generation. The path from forgotten birthday to reclaimed purpose wasn't easy or straightforward. It required courage to disrupt comfortable patterns, wisdom to redirect resources toward meaningful impact, and patience to allow my children time to process their own necessary transformations. But standing on this Galapagos shore, watching the Pacific waves that first captured my scientific imagination 50 years ago, I can say with absolute certainty, sometimes being forgotten is the wake-up call you need to finally remember yourself, and sometimes what begins as painful rejection becomes the catalyst for your most authentic chapter, even when that chapter begins at 70. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.